So this video is for anyone who's asking themselves some version of the root question, what should I do with my life? And how should I make that decision given multiple lines of potential? And what I'm going to share is how this question about life purpose is actually a symptom of what I think is a more fundamental issue. And so I'm going to go over why we have difficulty with this question, and I'll suggest some ways to reframe it so that we can answer it. And then I'll get to the underlying issue, which is that asking this question means you're on a path of integration, which is great because not everyone makes it on that path. But it means you're still cut off from higher forms of your own intuition, which is what's really needed for you to step into your higher calling or purpose. So the question of what should I do with my life is one of the most common problems that intellectually and creatively gifted empaths have, and or gifted people in general have. But if you're also an empath, you might feel even more stuck on this. Not only do you have a greater range and depth of abilities and potentials that you could develop, but you're also more sensitive to the things that might impact your decision or willingness to take action in a certain direction. So, for example, you might be highly sensitive to location or to atmosphere, to the general social energy that seems to run dominant in a certain field or profession. Yet, maybe that's where your gifts would seem to indicate that you're meant to be working, but there's just something really wrong with the energy, and you might experience this as a fundamental conflict in authenticity that, let's say, a lot of neurotypical people might be really not sensitive to at all. Like, it might not really register in awareness. As another example, you might have an innate and really well integrated combination of gifts that isn't recognized by social and collective systems, and it might even be frowned upon or seen as suspect and taken as evidence for things that aren't really true. In other words, you might be on the receiving end of unfair judgment and criticism or prejudice. For example, if you're highly mathematically advanced and it's something you like to talk about, but also you're really skilled and passionate about writing and you're trying to get your debut novel published. The only problem is it's on the more romantic side of things, and so it would raise questions on the part of publishers who can't see how they'd package you up. It would have been a lot easier if your novel were something about the social perception of mathematics, right? So this is how the matrix works. And then at least you'd fit into existing models for genre and trends in science communication. And someone who's a gifted empath is going to perceive all of this in advance and then just might not take further steps down the path at all because they know how the game is played. You can see ahead, you can see several steps ahead, you can see the way the logic works. So here's the key thing you need to remember. And if you're new here, welcome. Be sure to check out my other videos just to get all the background context and nuance on how I'm discussing some of these topics. So how I'm using certain terms, concepts, and how to understand what it means to be a gifted empath, and how we sit on a dimension of neurocomplexity and more. What's really important for us to remember is this last part about the neurocomplexity. If you're genuinely gifted, and especially if you're highly empathic on top of that, it's going to be really productive to understand yourself through the lens of neurocomplexity, where, giftedness itself is already a legit dimension of that. But in particular, to realize that we are outliers from the statistical middle of the bell, where most people are really not sensitive, not aware yet to many things that we already were a long time ago, and often just take a lot of flack for why are you so sensitive, or don't even think about that, right? Why are you wasting time on XYZ? So there's a lot of key traits that we're likely to have, and I've written about this on Medium, on Substack, but the big ones are that we're complexity seeking. We seek to integrate higher forms of knowledge and understanding, which includes ourselves, and we're fluent in more than one area. So typical categories of social systems are not sufficient for us. to put it really simply. So we're apt to bring in new combinations and innovative syntheses that might turn heads because they don't exist yet. And it's because of this preference for complexity and this genuine and deep respect for the truths of complexity as well as the complexity of truth that we're apt to spend much longer on this question of what should I do with my life. So, for example, like I can't be the only one who had like an entire bookshelf devoted to this topic when I was like 17, 18. I knew I needed to figure it out. And back then, I was just taking this like hyper logical approach to it. I knew I was an artist. I also knew I was intensely good at translation and like loved reading and writing in another language. Yet I was also really different from a lot of arts and humanities students because I was like really good at math, A plus in logic, and even after my undergrad degree, I still wanted to continue the courses in physics that I wasn't able to do previously because you had to make huge sacrifices and only like focus on two things. So ultimately, this question about life purpose really becomes transpersonal as well, I think, for us, because you're really asking both who am I on an objective level, as well as like what should anyone be doing with their life at this point, given where we are as a collective, given what we know about reality at this point. And so the question for me really quickly dissolves into like what's going on with everything. It's metaphysical. Where are we all really at right now? And what can I do here in a way that honors my own unique talents, knowledge, and abilities? So, in other words, this is standing up for the fact that you are who you are for a reason, which is to say, you're not a randomized collection of traits or a mere set of consequences from conditions you were exposed to, although these can be ingredients. This is not the organizing principle. Specific talents and knowledge and abilities have flourished in you because they'll be able to meet some, or make some exchange with the collective reality. So this is what it means for something to make sense. Someone might choose to exempt themselves from any and all collective relations and choose some path of annihilation or violence. And then we often call it senseless and even a waste. And it really harkens back to that early Christian proverb, which says, if you do not bring forth what is within you, what is within you will destroy you. And yet, to feel like we can bring everything forth that is within us, we feel like we need to see a need for it, or we need to feel like accepted in advance for it. Sometimes we might just need to see it in at least one other person before we can even recognize that as a part of us. And so this happens all the time. Everyone is showing us a different part of ourselves. The problem is that part of our group purpose as gifted empaths, and I've discussed this in an earlier video, which I published on October 12th, so you can go take a look, is literally to bring in new and higher forms of integration that don't yet exist. So we can't wait until we see them in the collective. That's what makes this so difficult, because they're not likely to be there, or there's only one other person doing something that looks like what we see as our path. And, maybe there's several different people, like each doing one of the things that we know is part of our path. But we're going to be the first person who's like integrating all of that together. And so that is our unique like challenge and responsibility. So with that said, let's talk about like 3 strategies for navigating one of these most pressing existential questions. And just a caveat, obviously everyone's going to have a different approach to this. So people come up with really simplified sayings like follow your passion, follow your curiosity, or don't do that, do what you're really good at and then get someone to pay you for it, and then just pursue your interests, and that's your purpose. Or even, feel like whatever you most feel like doing at the time is your purpose, and you don't really have to like create a schema or cognize it. You just like continue to work on what is like most calling to you at any given moment. So, and then your purpose can just keep shifting and unfolding from that. So what I'm going to share with you is just like what came to me earlier the other day. And I wasn't even like focusing on this topic or even like planning to do a video on this, but this just kind of came through and I just felt called to like just pass these 3 ideas on, and especially keeping our own neurographic in mind. And yeah, I did just coin that word, so you can source me on that. So here's the 3 insights that I had, and hopefully one of these can help you. The first is obviously we collectively need to let go of the paradigm where who we are is like rooted in some kind of unitary identity of being or doing like one thing, and instead move towards a model of integrated fusion, which is not only more authentic, it's also just more accurate. And the challenge here is, again, we will often have to be the example because most people may not have seen either our own authentic combination of abilities, knowledge, and modes of contribution. And while this might sound obvious, like let's just remember and appreciate how entrenched the hegemonic paradigms of social value and social organization currently still are. For example, not that long ago, I know from firsthand experience, it was still seen as like innovative to combine art and music as healing modalities in a traditional medical setting. So, as someone who's like studied all the arts, that's a little bit shocking for its conservatism, and it really is part of what makes so many of these other so-called exceptions like seem rich and fascinating and exceptional. So, like, let's normalize just not putting people into these really narrow boxes. I know some areas of public and professional life are not as tight this way, but many do still require like considerable norms of allegiance and behavior signaling. But the more authentic truth is, for example, like we have physicians who are professional football players, and brain surgeons who are best-selling nonfiction authors, and actors who are entrepreneurs and activists. And we have Oxbridge professors running popular Instagrams. We also have some of the top ranked medical journals, and I've done this research, publishing case studies of the firsthand reports of past lives and near-death experiences in the top medical journals. So that already dissolves several false dichotomies that I could talk about in a separate video. And I could go on with like so many other examples of like exceptional individuals, what they've achieved, and what I would consider this integrated fusion of this authentic fusion that goes well beyond the norms of like a single role or discipline. And so there's a group of us, there's a collective of us who I think we're tasked with the need to normalize this as a presentation of authentic expertise, rather than, dismissing such cases with like inappropriate judgments about someone's focus or dedication or whatever the denigration is. This is actually rather what authentic expertise looks like. So if you've been feeling deeply called to, for example, start a podcast, but that seems unheard of from the perspective of your PhD colleagues in the lab, it might be that this is a key piece of the sort of leadership that you're meant to step into. If you're the one seeing gaps or nuances that others don't, it really means you're the one who's best able to address those. Okay, and so the next download I got involves getting back in touch with your highest values or your core values. So if you haven't ever really sat down to do this exercise, I highly recommend it. This is your sign. Just you write down a list of all the qualities you value, the principles you try to live by, what you're aiming for, what you most appreciate, and you try to state this in the form of the root value for each of these things. So some examples of these might be like honesty, integrity, authenticity, friendship, self-expression, service, learning, teaching, freedom, and so on. So you make this list, and once you feel like you've stated all of the ones that really matter to you, like once you've run out of values, then go back and try to find what are like the top 3 or 4 core values that really seem to be driving all the others, the ones that all of the other ones seem to support. So, for example, maybe integrity and honesty are important to you because they support your aims of being of service, or making a meaningful impact is important to you because it would support authenticity or self-expression, and so on. You can also hone in on your top values by imagining how your life would feel without them. For example, if it's unthinkable, or if you feel like your life would really have no meaning if it didn't include that value, that's a good hint that that's one of your core values. For example, in my case, like personal growth and learning is one of my core values for sure. Like my life just wouldn't make sense without it. I can't even imagine, like, you know, not continuing to grow, not continuing to learn and to work on myself. That just wouldn't make sense. So what's important to note here though is that like all of these values will be interconnected. So you need to spend some time with this, but just understand that some are there because they're like helping drive this core set, and you want to find out what that core set is. And so the insight with this one is that instead of trying to achieve your core values through like pre-existing structures or institutions that others have created, try to reorient yourself towards how you could embody the value in some way that you create yourself. Not that an institutional route is like wrong, I'm not trying to say that, but it's just that it's important to really also have an internal locus of your own sense of purpose. So maybe this means you start a newsletter around one of these values somehow, or a local group, or maybe it becomes the focus for a series of artworks that you do focused around this value. So however your own talents might intersect and could become a vehicle for this, basically. And again, this might be really intuitive for some people and you've already done it, but it could also be like an eye-opening shift for others who just haven't approached it in this explicit way. So the third and final insight now goes back to the idea of the wheel that I mentioned in my video on doing the inner work. In this case, this is the insight that you'll need to start small with your purpose in order to get the angular momentum that can push the wheel into motion at all. So if you're feeling stuck, it's literal. It's in an energetic sense. And you don't yet have all the energetic momentum that you'd need to drive and direct this wheel of purpose. So you have to start with something small. And I've often said before that it can even be on the symbolic level. So if you're feeling like really paralyzed about something, really stuck to the point where you're actively pushing it away or even feeling afraid of it, just start at the symbolic level. You can take out a pen and paper and just like sketch out the outline of what you're trying to do. Just something like a simple cartoon sketch, or you could just write down like 1 or 2 sentences. And the point of this is that this is a psychosynthesis technique for creating change. And it really helps you begin to imagine by bypassing your usual habits for shutting down the part of you that wants to move in that direction. And so if you want, you can come back to this drawing or this piece of writing like every morning and keep working with it, or just read it aloud. And again, this will begin to activate new networks of association that can help you with that first small step. So if you imagine the wheel is like a really heavy iron wheel at the moment, you know, blowing on it is not enough to get it in motion. But what happens if you're like able to dig away at the dirt that's sort of like holding it in place from the other side? And then you can even like stick in like a little lever there. So there's always ways like that to kind of get more leverage around yourself. And another trick I've found that works is to try to take some action on it first thing in the morning before like the rest of your executive brain is really fully online. So the fear and the doubt networks, they live in the prefrontal cortex, and Yeah, they do live in the amygdala too, but it's like the networks themselves that guide you, the habits and everything, that's prefrontal. Um, and so these are all a little bit slower to come online, and you can take advantage of that. So um, it's actually like if you get ahead of it enough, it's actually your your lizard brain will like help you get ahead of that. So it's kind of counter to the way we normally popularly describe this, but this is, I'm just speaking from experience. I know it's worked for me. You can actually, early morning is a great time for like using that survival programming to like give you the push to take action on what you need to before the habits start creeping in. So, yeah, use that time to send that email or whatever the small thing is you need to do that's been holding you back. And that's it. Those are the three strategies that I felt called to share with you. So if you remember again from the video I did on inner work, these will all work towards that other end of the tunnel, like where we're headed. So moving forward, the more that we've been able to clear out that lower level programming that's been keeping us stuck, and the more that we can work on both of these ends, the better, because then that's when we can bring in more energy that gives us access to our higher guidance. Um, some artists and writers like might experience this as the muse, but it's really much deeper. It just takes the form of whatever you need for whatever field you're in, whatever you're working towards. So I hope that one of these at least gave you a useful new idea for many of you. Let me know what you think. Let me know how it goes and what you're working on. If you haven't yet joined my mailing list for the Gifted Empath webinars, I'm going to be continuing these, and I'd like to try to direct them more closely on the topics that you guys really need, what you're really working with, what you're struggling with. So feel free to leave a comment about that here or on the community page. And one other note, as I mentioned a couple videos back, I will be opening up some space for doing group coaching in the nearish future. So we'll meet on Zoom and we'll just discuss in a really more dedicated Q&A format. So if you'd like to be part of that, I'll have a link for that below as well. And yeah, and these will probably just be live only, just to respect everyone's privacy. And at least the first one will be no cost, so that you can see if this is something that you'd find useful. So I will send out updates to the list once we're a bit closer to that. So just keep an eye on your email. And yeah, so over the next few weeks, month, I will be focusing a lot more on just my webinars and getting these guidebooks ready for you. But I will still be writing on Substack, so you can find me there, and updates on the community page. So thanks to everyone so much for watching, and I look forward to hearing from you in the comments.